You are listening to the Freedom Unaffiliated podcast hosted by Independence Institute. On this podcast, you'll hear from the experts at Independence Institute talk about the issues important to Colorado and how to bring some sanity to this increasingly leftist state.
Understanding the Politics of Phobias by me, Mike Rosen, published on April 29th. The clinical definition of phobia is a psychiatric disorder related to an irrational, excessive, and persistent fear of some particular thing or situation. Examples are acrophobia, a fear of heights, claustrophobia, fear of confined spaces, octophobia, fear of the figure 8, cyberphobia, fear of computers, ablutophobia, fear of baitings, bear with me on this one, hypotomonstrosesquipedaliophobia, fear of long words, figures, and phobophobia, fear of phobias. I'm not making any of this up. A second definition is a fear or hatred of someone or something that may not be a psychosis. It's used as a suffix, phobe. A francophobe is one who fears or hates France or its peoples. A francophile loves France or the French. The key points here are the words irrational, fear, and hatred. You can dislike or disapprove of someone or something, but not irrationally or hatefully. Although fear can also be rational and justified, as can hatred. Now, this column isn't just about semantics, which means the meaning of language. It's mostly about the shrewd and manipulative use of contrived phobias as a tool of political propaganda. Let's start with some history. In 1969, a police raid on the Stonewall Inn, a gay club in New York City, triggered the Stonewall Riot, a protest that fired up the modern gay rights movement. Our culture has come a long way since then. For the most part, but not totally, it accepts and respects gays along with same-sex marriage. But that's not my issue here. I'm just analyzing political tactics. Stonewall is where I mark the start of the political weaponizing of the words phobia and phobe by the gay rights movement, later adopted by activists in other political movements. In the 1950s, the American Psychiatric Association listed homosexuality as a mental disorder. Undoubtedly, there were many who hated gays and could accurately be described as homophobes. But there were also many who simply disapproved of homosexuality for deeply held moral and religious beliefs while not fearing or hating gays. Nonetheless, gay activists lumped together everyone who opposed their cause by equating devout disapproval with irrational hate and fear. Then they unfairly branded all of them as homophobes, afflicted with homophobia in the sense of a psychosis. This was semantic malpractice to be sure, but very effective politics, especially when aided and abetted by liberal media so-called journalists who enthusiastically adopted that language and still do to this very day for other causes they favor. Now that LGBs, less so for the more recent alphabetical editions, are part of the respectable establishment. Clinical homophobia accurately applies to far fewer. Another example is the contrived term Islamophobia. There's nothing irrational about fearing or hating the terrorism of Islamist fanatics like Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and others of their ilk. It's certainly not an imaginary phobic fear. Their barbaric acts are all too real and often. All believers in Islam are not fanatical Islamists who pledge the world's more than 7 billion non-Islamists must be subjugated or slaughtered. Many Muslims oppose the abuse of women under Sharia law. It would be irrational, as well as suicidal, if the rest of us weren't Islamist phobes. But the top prize for contrived phobias goes to the most recent scam, transphobia, better described as absurdity, along with the whole notion of transsexualism. Fortunately, I'm not an employee of some politically correct corporation or a student who's compelled to accept this nonsense and memorize a glossary of 100 made-up pronouns by which individual trans people demand to be referred. And grammatically, I could never say something like, "Who do they think they is?" I just don't buy it. Males have a penis, females have a uterus. Biology and anatomy trump everything. You may desire to change your birth gender, but you can't. And gender isn't non-binary or fluid to be changed at whim by your mood of the day. Even with surgery, a male can't birth a baby. Gender dysphoria is a psychosis that comes from your brain, which often thinks of strange things, like some of your dreams. You argue in your brain when making decisions. Even if you convince your brain you're a woman, you'll still be a man, and a part of your brain will always know that. So, compromise and wear women's clothing or watch Oprah and The View. That's fine with me. But don't exploit your physiological advantage to invade girls' sports. I don't hate or fear you, so I'm not a transphobe. My rejection of your delusion isn't irrational, so I don't have transphobia. And I'm not sorry if my opinion offends you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Freedom Unaffiliated podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please give it a like and consider sharing it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you can catch our newest episodes. For more content from Independence Institute, go to thinkfreedom.org. Thanks for listening.